Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the Open Minds Executive Web Forum. I appreciate you carving out the time today. I see right now we're about 1 minute to 1 o'clock, so we are about to get started. Thanks, Chris, Lee. We have Rick without a K and Rick with a K joining us today. I'm just going to take a few minutes to share what we're going to do in this Executive Web Forum, introduce our speaker, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I'll start with this. My name is Christy Hoskinson, and I'm the General Manager for Open Minds Circle, our online market intelligence community. And today, as part of our weekly Executive Web Forum series, we're welcoming one of our senior associates, Ken Carr, and he's going to have a conversation today with you around how to demonstrate the ROI, return on investment, of a new clinical program. Before we get started today, I just want to actually get our GoToWebinar skills started and warmed up. If you're not familiar with the chat feature in the GoToWebinar, typically it'll sit up on the top right-hand side. You kind of have this application or feature for GoToWebinar on your screen right now. And what I'd like everyone to do in the chat feature, so you may actually have to take your mouse and open up the chat feature, but go ahead and state where you are dialing in from. So for example, if you are in Sarasota, Florida, like I am, I would write in the chat feature, Sarasota, Florida. But go ahead and put in the chat feature where you are from and where you're dialing in from specifically. Let's see what responses come up. So again, if you're just coming on, welcome to our Executive Web Forum here at Open Minds. I'm going to ask if you can type in the chat feature where you are dialing in from, and we'll go ahead and get started. Not seeing anything yet. Don't be shy. Where it says type message here, go ahead and write the city that you're in. And this is specific why I'm doing this right now to kick off our Executive Web Forum, because we do want you to use the chat feature and ask Ken questions. So welcome everyone. We see a lot more people have just joined us in the last few minutes. Don't be shy. If you're not familiar with GoToWebinar, there's probably a little pop-up screen in the top right-hand corner. In the chat feature, go ahead and write where you are dialing in from. And while you're doing that, I will go ahead and continue on with my introduction so we know we can get started on why we came together today. So we know it's not a secret, right, that health and human service provider organizations, they're going to refocus their strategy to launch a new service line during a time of crisis. And we know that in doing so, it will position them for success. The question, though, that we want to answer today is your new service line a good one? So in today's web forum, we're going to discuss the fundamentals of service line development and the development of a return on investment model for that service line. Throughout today, you're going to hear from Ken Carr. We would love for you to use the chat feature, so get comfortable with it, to ask questions to Ken during his Executive Web Forum. And similarly, he's actually going to pause from time to time and ask you guys some questions. So I know that it's really tempting, if I can use that word, to want to, check emails and do other work while the web forum is going on. But I might suggest you be on your toes, because there'll be some questions from time to time that Ken's going to put back out to the group. And we want to make this interactive, right? This is our elite members. Let's make this very discussion-based. The slides and the recording from today's web forum will be available on the Open Minds website tomorrow. So if you did miss it or you had to leave today, know that the recording and the presentation will be loaded. And with that, I'm going to ask that our senior associate, Ken Carr, come on the screen at this time. I'd like to introduce him, and then I will turn the mic over to him to get started. Awesome. Thanks, Ken.
Hi, Christy.
For those of you if you don't know Ken, Ken's really impressive. He has 30 years of finance, technology, data analysis, and reporting experience in the health and human service field. Ken is a subject matter expert in the Open Minds consulting practice. We're so lucky to have him. He's led numerous engagements in strategic planning, merger and acquisition prospecting, business process improvement, managed care, and value-based contracting preparedness, financial analysis of service lines, and technology selection. He is your man. All right, so we've got 11 people today, Ken, ready to hear from you. I'd like to turn it over to you and thank you for leading our discussion today. Let's get started.
All right, thanks so much, Christy, for that overview. And I do encourage everyone to let's have a conversation today. I think this topic is one of my favorites because it combines both how do we reshape and create innovation in our clinical services, those services we provide day to day, but link them to value and demonstrate that they truly bring value. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation as we move forward. Going to talk today first just about this whole movement from value into value from volume and how the concept of return on investment plays into that. I want to just kind of land then upon the services that we provide. We talk about service innovation, but just talk a little bit about how do you identify that new service or how do you reshape something you're doing now so that it has new relevance to payers and to the consumers that we work with. And then we're going to jump into the financial model side of things. We're not going to get too deep on the math, but enough math so we can really understand what does return on investment mean and how do I make the case to a payer for that. So let's just talk a little bit about the history and of where we have come as service providers in this market. There's been this big movement from volume to value, and underneath that we have all of these really big concerns that are driving our ability to create strategy moving into a new year. And I'm working with a number of organizations who look at strategy, and it's so hard to plan strategy, right, when there's so much that's up in the air. And COVID, the pandemic, has left us with this uncertainty. Are we moving into an economic recovery? We're going to have a K recovery where part of the economy recovers and part doesn't. So we're continuing looking at the scenarios, and I think that wherever we're going and creating this strategy plan moving into the future, there are two or three things that we need to remember. One is no matter what happens with the pandemic, we're going to see some rising deficits at the government level, and that is going to impact both healthcare and social spending. I think no matter what happens, there will be a time of recovery. It could be a year, it could be even longer than that. And so as we figure out our strategy, we have to identify how can we stay sustainable and have a really good growth strategy, even in this time when Medicaid budgets are being reduced, and when there's this high demand for social determinants, whether that be housing or employment or food security. How do we do that when the budgets are really tight? How do we create that relevance? And the other thing being that healthcare costs will continue to increase. If anything, and we've talked for a number of years about this movement from fee-for-service or volume into value. If anything, what we're seeing is that payers, whether that be government payers or health plans, are probably going to accelerate this whole view of value and movement to value because the funds are tight and the needs are great. And so we're going to see more uninsured, we're going to see more cost containment, but that cost containment is probably going to be managed very closely by value-based contracting. And the last thing is just really knowing, whether it be an economic bust, how will the Congress get together? Will money begin to flow? And even if it does, we've got a number of years ahead of us. So strategy becomes very important. And a key part of your strategy is how do you take the brand that you've developed, how do you take the services that you're providing now and make sure that they're relevant for a changing time? So let's look at this concept of new services for a changing market. As we're trying to identify new services, we are looking to the consumers that we work with. We're trying to identify what needs are out there that weren't there maybe a year ago, what needs are developing, what are payers seeing as the needs, and we're utilizing those needs, combining that with our services that we're providing now to determine where are the gaps and how can we step into the gaps. Another concept related to this new services development is the whole idea of being an innovator. And we don't talk about business models a lot in the health and human services field, But when we think in terms of innovative services, it's typically the innovators, those who come up with a very new service, that tend to be the price setters. So as I've worked with a number of organizations and they've begun to enter into value-based contracts, for instance, it's those first individuals in, the ones to step out that have the most ability to create some profitability with that new service and that new funding model. And so this whole concept of stepping forth to create these new services really positions you well to be more of a price setter, because you're dealing with something innovative, something that is in demand, and you're not just following others once the prices have already been set. So it's all about taking an innovative idea, making it marketable, figuring out how do you make sure that payers are aware of it, and then how do you come up with the investment capital? And once you came up with that investment capital, how do you internally know that you've got this return on investment internally, but also that you're showing that to the payer? So really, it isn't enough just to talk about the good services we provide. You know, we've got this brand, we're doing this great work. We need to really show the outcomes. And a part of those outcomes is demonstrating the return on investment to the purchasers of our services. We know that reimbursement rates have been on decline. We also know that, you know, one of the strategies is to take the services we have and tailor them as the market is changing. So often it isn't just stepping out and creating a whole new service, which can be more difficult than just taking the services we have and repackaging them, maybe shaping them a bit, maybe attaching them to a particular outcome that's important and making sure we can deliver on that outcome. Overall, we're looking for better value. We're looking for alternatives to what we're doing now that just move us along. And so as we do that, there are three things to consider in terms of your positioning in the market. You know, are you a provider organization so that sees itself as a specialty organization? You know the service needs of this consumer base very closely, and so you're able to step out as the specialty service provider and make the case to payers. Another approach is really your ability to take technology to make your clinicians more efficient, maybe to deliver services in ways and places that you haven't in the past, and utilize that technology to create this better alternative. And then just really looking at specialty solutions around primary care, the integration of services as well. So what are you doing to take the services you have now and create a more comprehensive approach? As you, as an organization, kind of think about your services, what bucket do you see yourself falling into? There are two different strategies for organizations. One is really this whole person care approach, and that's really aligned with organizations stepping out to become a certified community mental health provider, a behavioral health provider, a CCBHC, or becoming a behavioral health home where you're really beginning to provide more than just one service and you're looking at the whole person. And so you're becoming this integrated provider, providing a number of services. You know, the other approach is really in the area of becoming a specialist around stabilization and crisis management. And so you are seeing that you have this specialty. For instance, I look at residential care, and a number of organizations have done residential care, maybe 60, 90-day residential care. But what payers really want is for organizations to step forward and be able to do stabilization, crisis management, maybe short-term residential, and then following people into the community. And so this more focused ability. And so one of the strategy questions you face as you are figuring out new services to provide is related to, do I want to do whole person care, or do I really want to focus on becoming this specialist around stabilization and crisis management? So as we move through this and you think about your organization, I would encourage you to kind of consider, where does your strategy lie? Is it in that whole person approach? Is a very big integrated approach, or is it as a specialist for doing some very deep services for people when they're in crisis? Also, as you look at services, one of the things to consider is, as we move from volume to value, quality becomes a competitive differentiator. So when we're dealing with volume, price is probably the competitive differentiator. So if you're doing a lot of fee-for-service work, who are payers going to want to choose? It's going to be the least expensive provider, right? Because all that's really involved is healthcare as a commodity. So I get the most volume, I can accept the lowest price, and so I then become the person that people want to go to because I'm the cheapest provider. But as we move into this whole concept of quality and value, quality becomes the competitive differentiator. So some things that become important: customer perceptions of the services you provide are very important. So how do you measure that as you move forward? Customer segmentation. Who are the customers that I'm serving now, and how do I specialize in the outcomes that are important to that customer segment? How am I providing some competitive offerings, something that's different than others are doing, and different in the way that payers notice or consumers say, that's the organization I want to choose to receive my services. Customer perceptions of the competitive offerings. So how do people actually provide or perceive what you're doing? And then this whole concept of price elasticity. In price elasticity is just this concept of how much can you charge and still keep your customers and actually have more of a return to your bottom line. And in fee-for-service, there is almost zero price elasticity. If you raise your prices and someone can provide the service cheaper, you're going to lose that consumer or that payer. But if you can say, I'm raising my prices because we provide this additional service. Look at our outcomes. We do this differently. We have better quality outcomes that impact consumers overall better, then both consumers and payers are much more interested in that service, even if it's going to cost more money. So quality really becomes an important part of the scenario, especially as you're looking at return on investment. So as we start to talk about this concept of return on investment, your ability to use quality as a differentiator to drive those outcomes becomes important. I want to just touch on technologies, and as I do this, I just want to walk through this. Would be interested in any feedback you have. You can certainly type it in the chat box, but any insights you have around which of these types of technologies you've had the best success in driving value and in driving the results in your organization. So as I just walk through those, I encourage you to just kind of give your feedback. I'm quite interested to hear your perspective on it.
Ken,
yes.
Ken, hi, it's Christy here.
Yes.
Henry has posed a really good question, and I'll share it with you so you don't have to look for it. Thank you, Henry, for your participation. So Henry's asking, does specialization pay if prices on specialist services are going to decrease? Or are you relying on getting bonuses from VBR by higher quality? How do you do an ROI on investing on higher quality?
Well, I would say the higher quality and the ROI are all related to the outcomes. And later on in the presentation, we're going to look at some of the outcomes, the total costs that you can drive. And so if you are a specialist provider, your ability to track the outcomes are important to the payer, and then put some monetary estimates around that will help you to determine whether you can really make the case to the payer that your specialist service, your specialty service really will be beneficial. And I would say the other side of that Henry, is really around, we talk about the repackaging. So if you're doing a service right now, it's a very specialized service, but you're kind of maybe getting a kind of a set fee for it, your ability to maybe repackage it, maybe demonstrate to payers that there's this greater value and return, and negotiate a different type of payment system, an alternative payment method that can position you better. And it might be that you continue to receive a set fee. Maybe it's a bundled rate. Maybe it's just this fixed fee. But based upon the outcomes that you can deliver, you might also be able to have this performance-based payment as well. And so I think the concept you're talking about, one is around repackaging, and two is around just stepping out and talking to payers about what you can do and really doing some renegotiation. Because if you just continue to use your payment structure of the past without demonstrating the value and negotiating around how this is going to bring value to the payer, you're not going to be able to see that increased return. That's a great question, and hopefully as we move through the remainder of the presentation, that will become clear. So the technologies, once again, the data management, your ability to use technology to take data, to convert it into information, and then to use that information to drive results really is at the heart of what value and value-based reimbursement is about. Administrative cost management. So, as we move forward, it's so important to be looking at our internal infrastructure, whether that be human resource management, financial management, our ability to take technology and create lean processes so that we really can leverage that technology to do things with fewer resources and redeploy those resources to drive data and better decisions. That really becomes the strategic use then of these administrative technologies. Consumer interaction, we really have moved into a consumer-driven environment, and so your ability to engage a consumer in treatment is going to result in better results. We know that. Your ability to be able to give information, to get information, so the whole area of consumer interaction becomes important. Consumer treatment and wellness, so there are so many ways that we can do better care coordination. We can do certainly telehealth, and most provider organizations have moved into delivering telehealth, but there are so many. There's eCBT, there are other devices that help enable us as clinicians to deliver services in the community in a way that we've never been able to before. What that does is it improves consumer engagement, it increases our outcomes, and it creates these great efficiencies within the organization. And then population health management. And so what are you using, what tools, what technology to know who are your highest service consuming clients, and identifying them and using that data to drive your interactions and interventions. So that's just a little bit about the foundation. So I think one of the key things, and this goes back to the question you asked, Henry, is how do you look at what payers want? How do you take what you're doing, what you're strong in, and work those two things together so that you end up with a more sustainable payment that better serves consumers and meets payer needs? So some questions to consider. What solution is the payer looking to solve, and for what service issues? How interested is the payer in addressing kind of this holistic approach to services, if that's the approach you were taking? Or if you're a specialist, how interested in they are seeing the results that you can drive because you are a specialist provider and you know what you do very well and you have very good, consistent outcomes? What are the steps for creating a payer plan solution? So you've talked with the payer. Now, how do you actually step through creating a solution? What outcomes are payers interested in to address their member service quality and cost issues? What examples of service providers what are examples of service providers that have developed improved consumer outcomes and lower overall health costs? And then what are the steps involved in reaching out to the payer? We're going to delve into some of these. And as we move through these next slides, be very interested in hearing, your experience, for instance, in reaching out to payers. So, one of the big things that I have found to be helpful, especially when developing strategy, is to do not just an external view of what's happening in the market, but also to have discussions with payers. Those can help me understand, how do they perceive my brand? But even beyond that, how can I improve my services and my relationship with them? And what are the problems or the problematic populations they're working with? I may not even know that unless I have a conversation with the payers. And so really it kind of starts with this conversation and the relationship you're building. So if you understand those populations, most likely you're seeing it from a different perspective, and you may even have a solution, but your ability to then customize the solution that will address the outcomes. And then, and this is really key, as you're building that customized solutions, looking at some kind of a gain sharing financial model. Once again, is this a pay for performance type of agreement that you really want to enter into? Are you going to create a case rate because you can manage the risk of an individual perhaps receiving substance use treatments over a period of time, and you can kind of move them up and down in services efficiently so that a case rate becomes much more profitable to you than just being paid every time you do a particular treatment? How are you going to utilize your outcome and performance data? It's going to be critical. And then, and we'll talk about this in our last section, how are you going to demonstrate your return on investment? So one of the key things to consider as well is this concept of the integration of our behavioral health services with the social determinants. And I think that this issue has become even more important to payers, and we're seeing a lot of payers talking about it now because of the pandemic. In particular, looking at the factors that contribute to health. And we know that this has been a difficult year, the last 12 months of people, as they've been in quarantine, as they've been separated off from support systems, maybe spending a lot of time with family, maybe becoming unemployed, maybe facing food security issues, maybe housing issues, and the stress level is high, which is bringing on a number of behavioral health and substance use treatment issues. And so our ability to really begin to address the social determinants of health in a holistic way is going to be a part of that delivery of services and our whole calculation of that return that we can provide. And so when we're talking about return, often we're beginning to look just beyond that healthcare cost of dollars. But if we're working with a government organization, maybe a local government that is going to fund some services, our ability to talk outside of just the bubble of healthcare to also the impact that we can have around housing issues or addressing homeless issues and the budget that goes into serving homeless people. So the ROI can be much bigger than just the services we're providing. We're looking at the bigger bubble of healthcare, the bigger bubble of social determinants. So some steps for developing health plan solutions. I think the first thing is to identify the key problems. We're able to do that when we talk to payers, we have a conversation, and then we look at our core competencies, and then we create this match between there's a need there, and because of the way we deliver services, because of the type of services we provide, we can really modify those a bit in order to address those problems. We identify and really make sure we're targeting a specific population, and then what outcomes will we utilize to confirm that we are really successful with these services. We do some process mapping. That usually involves pulling together clinical folks with finance folks, with quality folks, management staff, direct staff, and really, if we're going to deliver this service differently, how do we re-engineer it? What steps do we need to do? How do we create a better product for the current market? And then that kind of goes into the operational and finance folks, and they create this financial model. I'm often asked then, as you're trying to refocus a service, what are some of the most used behavioral health performance measures? And so I've put some of these up here. I would be interested in any chat responses relating to which of these you see as the most important as you've talked with payers and as you've tried to redefine your services. Yeah, I think up there, the follow-up after hospitalization is one certainly that we see a lot of. And as we look at return on investment, the total cost of care, that's one that really becomes important. Emergency room utilization as well, very costly. And the linkage between the folks that we serve and ER usage is very high. And so our ability to create a program where we can reduce that ER utilization in a consistent manner can really drive a new approach to services. Readmission rates when someone has been in the hospital, and then just a number of these as well. I think that patient or consumer satisfaction should be brought into the equation. And just looking at the continued focus on value and conversations around payers, this access to care measure continues to be very important as well. Pause a moment and see if anyone has any chat around measures that you have found to be of great importance as you've talked with payers.
Ken, thanks for pausing and asking the audience some questions, and I'm just going to add to that. Feel free, guys, our valued elite members, to put your question in the question bar, as some have been doing, and or the chat feature. Either one works, we'll see them. So again, just if you want to comment or share some of those measures that Ken was referencing that you see of importance to payers, let's discuss. Don't be shy. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Christy. And I'm not seeing all of the chat comments, so please, if you see something, let me know. So once we identify those, behavioral health measures, the other piece is then how do we take those and link them into services? So what are some examples of services that create value? And so I've listed a few of these. A number of you may have already begun to move into providing these types of services. This top one, behavioral health service system with subcapitation, is, when we think about value, it's probably one of the highest risk areas of value, and yet there are a number of payers that have reached out and entered into some subcapitation contracts with providers. I was with a community mental health center, and we provided subcapitation behavioral health for a couple of counties. We're responsible for all the behavioral health and substance use treatments and the full array of services in those two counties, and we received a capitated payment for that. That's really at the far end, and often when we step into value, we're really looking at more something around care coordination, this next one. So specialty care coordination for consumers with behavioral disorders. It's this great way of bringing integration and whole life approach to the services we provide.
Hey Ken, this is Christy. Henry and Rick have brought up two very different points, but really important points on your prior slide. Henry mentioned that our payers don't seem ready to have these discussions yet. So that's Henry's point. And Rick mentioned they're being asked for engagement rates. So I don't know if you want to unpack that any further, different comments, but from Henry and Rick.
Yeah, so that's interesting in terms of these measures. a number of the payers I have talked to really are focused on the HEDIS measures, and so that, you know, there's kind of those top three on that first row, you know, what you do to address the total cost of care. So, you know, follow-up after hospitalization, emergency utilization, and readmission rates. Interestingly, next week at the Performance Management Institute, we're going to have a town hall session with some payers. And one of the pre-discussions that I've had with them is that they look to these particular payers look to provider organizations to bring forward the rates, be able to come and talk to me about what you can do, certainly around the HEDIS rates, but there's a more and more focus even beyond HEDIS on what are you doing related to specific service outcomes, and not just the access to care, but patient-recorded outcomes utilizing the PHQ-9. And so I have talked with a number of payers, and next week that'll be part of our discussion around what data do they want you to bring forward, and what data would they expect an organization to bring forward to demonstrate you're really data-driven, you know your consumers, and you know what's important to bringing health to them. And Christy, what was the second question as well? Sorry, I forgot.
Oh, that's
that
okay.
one.
Yeah, I kind of threw you 2 different points. Rick was asking or saying that he's being asked, or they're being asked for engagement rates, and Henry was the one who was saying that payers don't seem to be having these discussions yet. And I wanted to mention Henry did disclose it's the North Carolina state. Okay.
Yeah. So access rates, engagement rates, I think that those are all very important. And when we talk often about, you know, what rates are important to driving consumer engagement, but that consumers or that payers are really interested in, we are looking at those both access and engagement rates. So and examples of that would be a number of organizations have begun to track you know, how many, you know, what's the percentage of consumers that are still engaged in services after the 3rd scheduled time to receive a service? Because if that number is going down, then we're really not engaging consumers. And so a lot of provider organizations have begun to track that as an example of really their ability to engage consumers. So, you know, that engagement rate is an important one, and I know it goes beyond access. First, we talk about access, but then we really have to begin to look at, are we engaging folks? Are clinicians doing that? You know, and how, because that engagement is really going to drive then those ultimate outcomes. So there are a number of different approaches. You know, you have your center of excellence, and where you can really demonstrate consistent outcomes around a particular service or group of services and be recognized by a payer as the center of excellence, the organization that they want to send most members to. Certainly your ability to divert individuals from the hospital, to provide ER crisis stabilization, you know, to look at a chronic episode and to create a bundled rate. There's a risk in that, but if you know, for instance, if you have the full spectrum of substance use treatment services, and you can move people up and down as necessary. So if they need more intensive services temporarily, you can move them up, but that you have a plan for moving through time so that the ultimate outcome is that, you know, there is no remission back into utilization or using substances, then you can look at this option for an episodic rate. So a number of different opportunities that we do see that individuals can use to really refocus the services, and not just refocus the service, use that refocus to create a different form of payment. I want to take a few minutes and talk about the return on investment, because we often don't talk about what's the return and how do we, one, know internally, can we do this, and how do we negotiate a reimbursement rate even to begin with. You know, so many behavioral health organizations have come out of a history of equating the cost of a service with the rate we're going to get. But when we move into value, your ability to deliver value and outcomes opens up your ability to negotiate better rates. And so, just want to step through what are the steps to create a return on investment model. First, you want to build your financial model for your new service. Understand the definition of the service, what you want to drive in terms of results, and then build some key assumptions and drivers around that. You want to create some financial projections and really an integrated financial operational model. Next, you really want to estimate the current cost to the payer of addressing these same member needs. So this is what the payer is incurring now in the total cost of care. But if they will move into a contract with you, you can reduce those total costs because of the outcomes of the services you provide. And then you want to estimate the potential services and then effectively use the ROI to make the case for this new behavioral health service. So those are the four main steps I want to move through. First in, identifying your new service model, who's your target population? What's the problem that your new service addresses? In terms of you're going to have better outcomes, you're going to drive the overall lower cost. How does your approach differentiate your services from competitors? This whole competitive piece becomes very important because if you're doing something differently and can demonstrate the outcomes for it, that positions you with payers. What evidence-based practices or pilot programs is your service model built on? What outcomes do you intend to achieve with the new service model, and what indicators will you use to drive those outcomes, and how will you get the data for those outcomes? So how are you going to link up your data collection in order to make sure that you are using data-driven approaches to achieve those outcomes? So just, stepping through it, identifying your key timeframes, creating a financial model with knowing your start date, your implementation timeframe, when will you be fully functional? Because there will be a time period from when you start the service to when you're fully functional, when you're going to be losing money. You're not going to be bringing in as much revenue as it is costing you. And so your ability to understand what that investment capital is going to be needed for that startup period becomes important. Estimate the total consumer population, build the staffing plan based upon the service model that you want to achieve, estimate the various expenses, and then apply your overhead. So quite often it can look like this. And just to step through an example of a financial model in building a new service, this actually was for a care transition type of model. And as we were working with the organization, one of the things we anticipated was that the target cost for the consumers that would be involved in this model was somewhere around $250. We often talk at Open Minds about your ability to do some target costing, and target costing starts with what do we think the payer's willing to pay? And sometimes that's some initial discussions, that's looking maybe at what the market can stand. So you start with that target cost, and you want to make sure that you're not going to exceed that when you build your costing model. Identifying your time frame. When you start to hire staff, that's where you're going to start to incur some big costs. When are the services going to begin? Is it a month later? Is it 3 months later? And how long will it take you to get fully functional? All of those are going to drive some of your cost projections and become very important for your planning process. How many use the term? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Ken. Matthew has asked us a good question as well. So he typed in the question, best data source to estimate for total cost of care / cost of care. Do we rely on payers, or are there additional sources other than the traditional fee-for-service?
Well, I think it's a combination, to be quite honest. It would be nice if we had payer data, and I know that we can get that data from some payers when we talk with them and we want to kind of put together an idea of the total cost of care. Often, and I will show you an example on a couple of slides in a moment, often we just end up using some market data to make some initial estimates. And if that can get us in the door to get some more specialized costs from the payers, then at least it's a good start. So I think ultimately our ability to be able to get that information from the payers, but it's not always available. And so I don't like to let that stop me from moving forward with some estimates. And so in those cases, I'll just pull some market data. I'll find the best information I have and create the model, have the conversation, and then we can always refine as we move forward. But that's a really good question around the target cost. And often, so if I'm creating a totally new service, you know, sometimes it's a conversation or talking to a couple of different payers and just trying to get some sense for them. So you're not shooting so high that they aren't interested, but you're not shooting so low that your cost model isn't going to work for you. Certainly estimating the number of members becomes important. And then staffing, you know, what staff you're going to need. Staff is often, you know, 80%, 70 to 80% of the cost of our services. So our ability to really carefully do two things: understand what staff are needed in order to drive results, but two, how can we best leverage those staff so each person is working at the top of their license as we build our financial model. And of course, you know, there are other expenses, and you can get into a cost model that become very, very detailed, but often big estimates end up serving the purpose in terms of building your initial service costs. Once you know all those drivers, then you can kind of put that together, apply some potential revenue rates, look at the cost estimates based upon the volume as you're building and serving more consumers. You have some idea how many consumers you're going to serve in 6 months or in 12 months, and what it's going to take in terms of staffing to kind of build up your service infrastructure. To do that, your model becomes this flexible approach to estimating revenue based upon projected expenses that is then based upon the number of consumers that might be served. So, you know, once again, being able to take your expenses, for instance, by staff person, and really begin to understand on a unit cost, how much might those add up to. And then, you know, once you have your complicated and working with your finance staff to really build the financial model, it might have a lot of complexity behind the scenes. The key thing is that once you want to communicate then to your leadership staff, once you want to move forward to educate people on will this work or not, really boiling it down to the simplest format possibly becomes important. So I like just using, you know, a format that captures what's really key in this model. So in the situation of, you know, doing some hospital diversion work, you know, how many people do we think that we could serve in the community on any given month? Based upon our unit cost, what was that going to cost us? Based upon that target rate of what we thought we could pay, how much money would that bring in? And then we could begin to track then how much money might we lose as we built the service, and then how much money moving forward would create a net excess. This looks like a lot of money lost early on, and so we might be flexible in terms of maybe using fewer staff, adapting the model, maybe squeezing down the implementation if we can, but our ability to see the results rather than just stepping in blindly becomes important for internally knowing, is this going to work for us or not? Is there going to be a return internally in the service we're providing? I want to just pause a moment, see if there are questions on this part, and then we want to look at how do we demonstrate that return to payers. So this is, I think, the interesting piece. Once we know that we've got this really great value-based service and we've built the model, we know how it's going to work, we've connected that model to the outcomes, and we believe that we can drive those outcomes, and we know how much it's going to cost us to get going, but how much margin at our estimated rate that we're going to be able to generate, then we really want to be able to talk to the payers and to really market that service because it meets their need. But the other aspect of that is, how do we demonstrate that this is going to reduce their overall costs? And so this goes back to the question that was just asked. I think, starting with a estimate of the population of the consumers that we are going to be serving, how many folks do we think that we can serve with this service once it's up and fully running? Estimating the number of high-cost treatments those consumers are receiving currently. And once again, we're going to use the best data we have. If we can get data from the payer, we want to use that. But if not, then we're going to use other market data to make some assumptions. We want to identify then the potential reduction in that total cost if the payer moves forward with this new service that we can provide. And then from that reduction in cost, we can deduct what it's going to cost us. So here's an example that I have worked with in the past, some broad data, but looking at, for instance, we think that we can keep people out of the hospital with our new service. And so, one of the total costs, one of the big cost things is around this HEDIS measure of reducing emergency room visits. And if we are serving 250 individuals when we're fully functioning, and we do our research, and we either get this research from the payer, which would be great, or we use other data and we identify that on average for this really high cost population, high needs population we're going to serve, they in any given 12-month period of time, they're in the ER 6 times. Then we know that, that's 250 individuals on average 6 times in the ER. That's 1,500 ER visits a year. But if our target really is to reduce the number of ER visits by 25%. So instead of going in the hospital 6 times, we think that first year we can really move that needle down to 4 times. So we're reducing the number of ER visits by 25%. So instead of 1,500, that 1,500 is reduced by 375 visits. And if we know that the average cost per psychiatric ER patient going into the ER is about $1,500, actually, I think the costs typically nowadays are much higher, but we would once again do some market research, get some very good data, then we can say we're going to reduce the number of ER visits by 375 for this population of 250 people, $1,500 per visit. So we can deliver savings of, or the cost reduction in ER visits of $562,500. And if at the same time we say with the same approach, we can reduce inpatient hospital admissions as well, and then on average, that's about 4 per high intensive need client we're going to serve. So instead of 1,000 inpatient admissions, it's reduced by 250 down to 750. And the average cost of an inpatient admission is about $6,700. We can move the total cost needle down by $1,675. So we're using data. We want to use the best data that we can get at. If it comes from the payer, that's all the better. If we have to use the best market data, we can. And we're making assumptions, but we want to build this potential return on investment that enables us to begin to have this conversation, but also sets our targets as we move forward. So once you have that, you can kind of wrap it all up, be able to show the potential benefits, calculate this ROI, and I would recommend doing that over a period of time. And look at the numbers. So you have this objective approach, but you're also going to have this qualitative approach as well. So your approach might look something like this. So what are the final financial benefits overall? Well, we think that with this service, with our ability to intervene and keep people out of the ER and out of psychiatric hospital admissions, we can save you in year one $2,237,500, and then we kind of add that up along the way. and that the cost of our services in year one, $750,000, our anticipated return is going to be, for you, you're going to reduce your total cost of care by about $1,487,500 times 3 years, ends up being about a $4.4 million reduction in total cost of care. Yes, you're paying us now about $2.2 million over that 3-year period of time, but you're driving your costs down because we're going to have this effective solution. So the return on investment ends up being positive for the payer. And so that's kind of the quantitative approach. And then the qualitative would be, we all know that, the reduction in time to identify and deploy staff reduces crisis intervention, faster evaluation. Referrals are based upon that risk stratification. So we're going to know which consumers, because of the assessments that we're doing and the referrals we're getting. The reduction in time from first contact to referral to first contact is going to be reduced. We're going to have a reduction in lost contact with the consumers, and we're going to really improve engagement overall. So you're going to have these qualitative factors in addition to driving down the cost of care. So that's a very simple approach, but it demonstrates this whole concept of how we can be demonstrating the return on investment for the services that we provide. And most of that return is going to be typically in reducing the cost on that physical health side of use of those high expensive inpatient services. So with that, Christy, I'm going to see what other questions have come in. I know we only have a few minutes left, but just wanted to be able to step through both, this whole concept. How do we create a new service? Sometimes it's just reshaping what we do, link it to outcomes that we know we can deliver, and then based upon those outcomes, put some math around that. Some math that really gives us assurance that we can create a margin, but also convinces the payer that we bring value in the total cost of care.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ken. At this time, I don't see any additional questions that have come in from the questions, and we've got just about 3 minutes left. Let's just put it up there one more time before we close with 2 very important announcements. So hang with us. We've got 13 people on the line. Any other questions for the good of the group that Ken can answer? Go ahead and put them in the question feature or chat feature. All right, well, maybe a few will come in, Ken, while I do my 2 very important announcements. You heard Ken talk about further education that we're going to provide next week, but I just want to say we're going to hit pause on our weekly executive web forums next week, and we're going to come back on February 18th for our next one, which, as you guys know, is exclusive, right, for our elite members. And this is telehealth sustainability. What an incredible topic, as we know we've all headed in that direction. So there's the slide in front of you now. We're going to learn from Sharon Hicks, what is the role of a hybrid telehealth in person in this next normal that we're living in. So be sure to register for that. As you guys all know, it is on our events page under Executive Web Forums. And then last but not least, as we continue to bring you executive level education, we have our Performance Management Institute next week. And that's exactly why we're hitting pause on these weekly web forums. If you have not yet registered, elite members, this is the time. It is jam-packed with incredible information. You can see on the left-hand side who our keynotes are, what the seminars are. You can hear more from Ken. I've actually reviewed his presentation. It's phenomenal. If you like this, come get more of it along with Kathy. And of course, we kick off our Performance Management Institute with the Children's Executive Summit. So all this takes place next week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. It's all virtual. If you happen to live in Florida and want to come out to the Clearwater, Florida area, we are going to have a few on-site networking opportunities. And look at that, all 13 stayed with us. That's awesome. Again, if you didn't hear me or see me at the beginning, I'm Christy Hoskinson, and I'm the general manager of the Circle Online Market Intelligence Community. And if you hear my dogs in the background, that is because I am working from home and I have 2 dogs. But it's a great participation from all of you today. We appreciate it. Ken, kudos to you on such an incredible discussion. And Corey, who we haven't seen today, he's our producer. We want to thank him as well. hopefully we'll see you guys at the Performance Management Institute. And if not, we'll resume next week on the 18th with Sharon presenting on telehealth. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And if you're looking to share this presentation, it will be loaded tomorrow on our resource page under presentations. Thank you, everyone.